This is Before the Stream. I am Jason Bemis Lawrence. This is my podcast where I talk to musicians, generally, about records that we listen to on a physical medium. Doesn't have to be that way. I didn't revisit the record we're going to talk about today on a physical medium, but I first bought it on one in the 90s. Today we're talking about Soundgarden's Badmotorfinger. It's their third studio album. It was released on A&M Records on September 24th, 1991, the same day as Nirvana's Nevermind. Movies in the theater at that time were The Fisher King, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and Child's Play 3. I guess it was a slow time for movies in the theater at that point. Some of the big songs on the radio all around were EMF's Unbelievable, Bryan Adams' Everything I Do It For You, Paula Abdul's The Promise of a New Day, and Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch's Good Vibrations. I am so excited to have the guests that I have with me. I don't know how you introduce someone with this many talents and achievements. There's too much to list, but he is a multi-instrumentalist, a composer, record producer, recording engineer, mixing and mastering engineer. He's a photographer. He's a filmmaker. He pretty much does everything. Just, should go to his website, djamesgoodwin.com, and just get lost in his badassery. If you've been listening to music at all in the last long time, I don't know, lots of years, you've probably heard things that he's worked on. Some notable recent records were with Bob Weir, Kevin Morby, Craig Finn, The Hold Steady, Bonnie Late Horseman. My current new obsession is the band Muzz. He owns and runs his studio, The Icecon, which is a very magical place, and fronts his own band Snowflake, and is a part of other bands like Ultram that are wonderful, even has his own store. Daniel James Goodwin is here. Dan, welcome.
What a brilliant intro. Thank you.
Thank you.
My one
so
talent
much
is I can't sing like Chris Cornell, nor do I look at all like him. And I wanted both of those things to be true when I was 14.
Yeah. I think we all
did. You have that thing when you were like 14 where you idolized a rock star and you would look at yourself in the mirror and think like, oh yeah, I can totally look like him? Or even better, you meet somebody who looks like that person and you automatically think that they're cool. And unfortunately, they're usually not.
Right.
Like there was a guy, not to derail this, but there was a guy around that time when this record came out, there was a guy who did open mic nights at this place called the Supreme Bean. It was like a hipster coffee shop, like early 90s style coffee shop. Like could have been the set of Reality Bites or Singles or any one of those movies.
Totally.
And I forget his name. I think it was Neil, but he looked like Kim Thayil, the guitar player from Soundgarden. And I automatically thought this guy was super cool because of that. But then when I talked to him, he was just a total douchebag. Not at all cool. And it somehow in my mind, I conflated that with Kim Thayil not being cool. Like, I met this guy who looked like they must be the same. And if he's a douchebag, then Kim must be a douchebag. It took me a long time to get over that. It's such a weird thing.
Yeah, I watched a couple interviews just in the last several days with Kim Thayil. He seems like the most chill dude.
Oh, yeah, totally.
When I started this podcast, I made this huge list of records, and this was, of course, on it, but you mentioned it to me without seeing the list.
Yeah.
You chose this record, and I was like, oh, great, yeah, of course. But then going to listen to it, I was like, you know what? I had this CD, but I think I had it at a time I would pick and choose tracks. I wasn't listening to records in the way that I listen to records now, or have been for a long time, where I put the whole thing on. Maybe in the car, I was listening to tapes more, and so I would make a lot of mixtapes and stuff.
Sure,
Going back to it, I thought, wow, I put Rusty Cage and Outshined and Jesus Christ Pose and maybe Somewhere on mixes.
Yeah.
And those are the songs that I heard a lot. And the other ones, I was a huge fan of Super Unknown. I listened to that record cover tons and tons, but I did not even realize until this came up that I didn't know Badmotorfinger nearly as well as I thought I did.
Right.
It's been so long. I just haven't revisited it. So
I think,
really
I think like, it's funny that I think like Outshine gets kind of, even though it wasn't the first single, it's like the one that everybody remembers from this record.
Yeah.
And, you know, rightfully so. It's a good enough song, especially for the time. But like, to me, there's just so much other great shit on this record. It's crazy to me.
Gosh.
I go back, and I think you're a little bit younger than me. So, I mean, not by much, but it may have had a difference in how we listened. Like, I remember growing up purely with records, like long play records. So we didn't have a CD player in the house until probably like I was 16 or something.
Right.
And my parents divorced, so I was living with my dad, but all we listened to was records. So I was pretty much used to just having records on and listening to them in that kind of long form way, you know?
Yeah.
So I remember like when I started listening to Badmotorfinger, kind of thinking about this podcast, I could anticipate the next song in a way. It was like triggering a memory for me, like records do, you know, and you know the transitions in your mind. You already know the key of the next song and how it starts, and like your brain is just like muscle memory. It was crazy because I haven't listened to this record in ages.
Right.
And I mean, David Negler actually can tell you a funny story. You should ask him personally about this.
Okay.
I had, at one point, I think I had 4 or 5 copies of Badmotorfinger in various formats. And him and Tom from Nova Social had stayed at my apartment years ago. And like the next day, David was like, "So you really like Badmotorfinger, huh?" Which is so true. But like one of them had like extra songs on it. One was a cassette. Yeah. There were like 2 CDs because somehow I bought 2 CDs. And
right. That happens. I definitely had multiple copies of certain records that had funny stories behind, like somebody leaving it at your place or whatever. Very funny when you only had records on physical medium, just where they would end up.
Oh, yeah.
And dealing with, you know, even if it was the car, like the wrong CD in the right case. Nothing,
totally.
Nothing
or
more infuriating.
Scratch to holy hell, and then you had to buy a new one.
Totally. You mentioned Outshine being the one that people think about. That is definitely the case for me, and partly it was because of playing guitar. That seems like at the time once you learned what drop D was, you learned the riff to Outshine. Totally. I never learned the whole song.
Right.
I didn't even go that far. It was just, I want to play that riff.
Yeah.
Didn't know it was in 7. Didn't know, it was just like, that's a riff you can play in drop D. That and like a, you know, Rage Against the Machine or something.
For sure.
Like Killing in the Name were like the ones that everyone knew how to play once you put the guitar.
Yeah. It's funny, like actually mentioning that Outshine is in 7. When you think about it now, and you think about the temperature of radio and how songs become hits, it's so strange to me that like, I look back at that time, that specific year probably even, but that specific maybe like 1990 to maybe 95. It was kind of the last golden era of big labels and letting artists be artists, you know?
Yeah.
And like, God, you listen, I mean, it's true, that song's in 7. The riff is sort of caveman-y, but like the chorus riff is actually really kind of interesting. I remember learning Outshine, and like the chorus chords are super strange and kind of just weird, you know? And the whole kind of bridge section doesn't do the typical pop thing. It's like all of it is pretty antithetical to pop, except for the melody, which says a lot about, you know, music, of course, and the timelessness of it. But like, I mean, you could never hear a song in 7 on the radio now.
Yeah. It speaks to how smooth they were able to make all the odd time stuff, I think. I didn't even realize that. I was reading something about the record, and after having put it on once or twice in the last week, and I mean, I hear the quirks. I always did hear the quirks and how they played, but one of the reviews or whatever was mentioning all the odd time signatures. Like, I was thinking, I didn't hear that many, and then I go back and like, oh yeah, this is 6, this is 7. There's odd bars here and there, but it seems like Matt Cameron, they were trying to smooth out some of the quirks and the time and doing a really good job at it. Yeah. Which makes it poppier in a way while still being weird. It strikes me that they get looped in as one of the 4 big grunge bands from Seattle in the 90s with Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Alice in Chains, of course. But this record feels very different from any record that any of those other bands made.
I think I remember It was the same day, and I think it was probably the day it came out because I like 91, I was 14. So my parents were divorced. I didn't drive yet, but I would spend weekends at my mom's house. And I would always watch, on the weekends, I would always watch Headbangers Ball on MTV, super late night, I think on Saturdays. And then on Sundays was 120 Minutes. So, and up till that point, I probably listened to a lot of Metallica. I forget what year And Justice for All came out, but that was probably a big one for me. And
89 or something.
Yeah, 89. So like, I had listened to heavy music before, of course, but then I heard like Nevermind. It Smells Like Teen Spirit, I guess. I saw that on MTV, and I think I saw maybe the video for Alive or something. And I went out on the same day with birthday money that year. I went out and bought Pearl Jam 10 and Nevermind on the same day. And I remember I liked Pearl Jam to a degree. I think I fell out with them pretty quickly, but Nirvana I loved, and I loved Nevermind a lot. But not long after that, I remember being at my mom's house, and up till that point, I had not heard Soundgarden. I had no idea. And I saw the video for Jesus Christ Pose. I mean, like, I had no idea what hit me. It was like a whirlwind. It captivated every inch of my body. It was like the heaviest shit I'd ever heard. It wasn't heavier than Metallica, but it was heavier than Metallica. It was like Drop B or whatever the fuck that tuning was. And then this crazy ass singer who, like, to me, I grew up with Zeppelin and Sabbath from my dad, and like King Crimson and Zappa. So that was sort of, I always loved those records, and they formed a huge part of who I am, but they were my dad's records, And when I heard Jesus Christ Pose, it was like, oh, this is like my Sabbath or my Zeppelin. Yeah. And it just, man, it like grabbed me like crazy. And I went out, I think the next day, and I like begged my mom to borrow $10 to go buy the cassette or whatever. And that cassette tape didn't leave my stereo for probably like a year. It was crazy.
That's awesome. That's how you get that muscle memory thing.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I wanted to do this from the beginning, to talk about this phenomena, is that, like, I think of the records that I had on tape when I was little and didn't have anything else to listen to, so they'd be in there for a year, and how I've heard that music more than I'll ever hear any other music.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm constantly trying to search for other stuff. There's things I love. I listen to them a lot, but that sort of muscle memory I am not getting. There are not records in the last, I don't know, decade or whatever. There's very few where I am already feeling the next song in my body, like you mentioned, when the one before is ending.
Totally.
And I miss that.
I did that, like listening to this, I went back for the last week and change, maybe 10 days. I've listened to Badmotorfinger probably 30 times. And I've like done the same thing that I did when I was 14. And then I went back and listened to Louder Than Love and Ultra Mega OK. And even last night, it was late. I couldn't get to sleep, so I watched Singles, which I hadn't seen in like fucking 12 years, at least.
I tried to find that the other night. I was like, if this is free, we're watching it, and I couldn't find it for free, and we didn't pay the $2 or whatever, some cheap. But it
was 99 cents on Amazon for what it's worth.
Totally, I should have just done it. We'll watch it. But I wanted to see the scene with Chris Cornell, where he's just standing there and he's
bopping his head at the car stereo.
Yeah, and he keeps turning it up till the windows break. So funny. I was thinking of how Chris Cornell seemed mysterious to me, especially in comparison to like Eddie Vedder or even Kurt was around. You saw more. You heard from Kurt more.
Totally.
I feel like at the time.
There was a darkness too, like the Soundgarden. There was a darkness in the music that was like, it was sort of Sabbathy in the way that like Ozzy had that mystique, and I think Soundgarden had a similar thing where, because I remember like the song Jesus Christ Pose. Of course, you have these religious connotations, and then immediately at that age, you're thinking about recoiling from your parents' religion, but also maybe scared that they might perceive it as satanic or darkness or anti-religious or whatever. And so you like get these weird things, especially at the tail end of the 80s where there was the big like satanic music thing, and like Congress was trying to pass legislation to, whatever. That's a whole long thing. But I think I had the same thing about Soundgarden where they were mysterious and dark, and they felt like gods to me in a way that other bands didn't. Like Nirvana felt like the dude I know in high school who, skates and, occasionally smokes cigarettes and whatever and kind of fucks off. But Soundgarden was a different thing. It was very intelligent to me. And it was really, it wasn't just flipping off the system for the sake of flipping off the system. It was like thinking man's metal to me. That's how I always perceived it.
Totally. Reading about it in the last few days, metal comes up a lot. I never really thought of them as metal, partly just because of that branding that they're one of the 4 big grunge bands. And I mean, it is heavy, like you said, and it makes sense to me, especially then, that it was like in the metal category. But I was like, what is different about this that still doesn't make it metal in my mind, even though I'm trying to put it there? And partly it's just in metal, to me, this is probably wrong, but there's like this aspect, at least of what I thought of it back then, this aspect of like dexterity, of like trying to play as fast as you can, or riff as hard as you can, or whatever. You know, there's something about Metallica where it's like there's a show-off nature, you know, the guitar solos, or how fast Blackened is, or, you know, or the bass drum notes in one, and it doesn't seem to have that. Like Soundgarden, they came from a place that, like, this record is more song-oriented, I think, than what they had previously done, and then they went even more that way with the next couple after this, I think. But they seem to come from a place where they were just playing in a room as a band, trying to make cool music. There wasn't an aspect of, I want to show you what I can do.
Right.
And not all metal is that way, of course, but it just seemed to put it in a different category in my mind.
And even Chris Cornell he's probably like one of the, at least in my opinion, one of the great hard rock singers of all time, probably if not the best, you know? And but he wasn't virtuosic in the sense of like he's showing it off all the time. He was just really good at it. Probably the most virtuosic player was Matt Cameron, you know, because I remember like thinking, wow, what is he doing? And like, particularly on Jesus Christ Pose, I still can't figure out how to play that song. I still can't figure it out. I've been trying all week. Now, at this point in my life, when I'm a way better drummer than I was when I was 14, and I still can't figure out how he did it. I sat there for an hour yesterday trying to figure it out, and I could not do it. So it's one of the, and I've watched videos, and it's like, it's strange. He's doing things that I just can't unpack, you know? So he's probably the most virtuosic, but it doesn't read like that at all.
No, it really doesn't. No. I mean, I always knew that he was really, really good. It just didn't occur. It wasn't like Neil Peart or something where you hear things like, whoa, I got to go try to play that. Yeah. He first struck me, I think it was partly because of what I'm talking about, like how I didn't devour Badmotorfinger the way I thought I did back then. But it first struck me when I was listening to Super Unknown, that back in when I was 14 or 15 or whatever, that he was navigating odd time signatures and weird things happening in such a seamless and musical way. Yeah. That was the first time I remember thinking, whoa, like this guy is a monster.
He did this thing for me at that age, which I never heard before except in jazz music, which was the keeping time with the hat on the left foot, which is such a jazz thing. It's like a total, you know, it's an Elvin thing, really. Like if I could compare Elvin and Matt Cameron. And I remember listening to Matt Cameron and thinking to myself, I finally connected the bridge between jazz and rock and was like, oh, right, so you can actually do both. Because he's doing this thing that I hear all the time on like Coltrane records. It's that hi-hat. How does he do that? And then, you know, up till that point, I probably wasn't conscious that the bridge existed. You know what I mean? It was like you segmented music and you were like, oh, if you're good at jazz, you can't be good at this or whatever. And it's just youngness and naivete, you know, knowing that stuff.
Of course.
It was funny.
Yeah, it's been interesting to listen to him a lot in the last week. Because I haven't really followed Pearl Jam. I was a huge Pearl Jam fan through high school, and I fell off with the records and stuff, but would be aware. In the last 20 years, that's kind of been his gig. Yeah. And so I sort of think of him playing that music when it's too bad he's not playing other, you know, whatever. Yeah. He's doing great for himself.
I'm sure his wallet's fine.
Better for it. He's fine. Yeah. But just in terms of listening to him play music that he could, you know. But even as a Pearl Jam fan, he probably didn't switch over until I was at the tail end of my fandom, but I loved Dave Abruzzese in Pearl Jam.
He had the big, I remember the big Flavor Saver, right?
Totally. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was frustrated with him as a Pearl Jam fan, I guess listening to live shows or listening to some of these older songs, and I was trying to figure out what it was, because it just seemed like he was kind of banging it out in a way that Abraziz had been more musical, and coming to it just in the last month or so before I talked to Anthony, it's like, I think that Dave Abraziz had this kind of like swing in his playing.
Oh yeah.
And I think I just got used to a certain kind of like swing in those songs that Matt Cameron feels like he has like just a weightier, straighter,
totally,
just kind of heavier beat.
Yeah,
which is great.
It seems to me like Matt Cameron is more Bill Bruford, and Dave Abraziz is more like, you know, Bonhamy, I guess, in his swing.
Yeah.
Pearl Jam always struck me as just generally more sort of loose and jammy. Maybe that's why I fell out with them. I don't really know. Like I ended up, I liked 10 a lot, but I think that, what was the second record? Versus?
Versus,
yeah. I think I heard it and I was like, okay, it's cool. But for whatever reason, I was always drawn more to mathy stuff in general. So it just didn't strike me the same way. But I always did love the one guitar player, Stone Gossard, because he had that band called Brad, which I really quite liked.
I saw them.
Oh, really?
Back in the day.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt.
In St. Louis.
That was a good record. That first Brad record, that first song, Buttercup, was beautiful. I love that song.
Yeah. I'll have to revisit. Yeah. It was like a smaller club in St. Louis because they weren't known that well, but I went, and most people went because they knew it was Stone's band, and people were like yelling out "Alive" and stuff. It's like, shut up, give them a break, please.
And I think the other Brad connection was that band Satchel, right? The singer was from Satchel, and I quite liked Satchel at the time. That was probably like late mid-90s or something. And that's a total other wormhole. But
it's interesting though that you say like Pearl Jam loose and jammy and stuff, because when I think of differences between Soundgarden and them, it seems like Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Alice in Chains too are just a little more like oriented about a song, like shorter songs, just a chorus, concise songs, whereas especially before Badmotorfinger, I mean, Soundgarden was like a jammy to me, like not a jam band, but like play a riff a lot, like Black Sabbath or something coming at it. And so they honed in on songwriting.
I have no doubt that was like Terry Date, the producer, his influence, because he was like, I'm sure that he was pushing them to do that to a degree, you know what I mean? But you're right, like some of that earlier Soundgarden stuff is really strange and long form and abstract. And at the time when I was young, I was like, whoa, this is weird. This isn't like Badmotorfinger at all. But then I came to really love it, you know?
Yeah. It just took me back to a time. It's not really back to a time. Just it feels like in the past to me, because I haven't been in a band that just all got in a room together and played for hours all the time and came up with stuff in a long time. That's harder to do in New York City. Yeah. I never even thought of that before I came here or anything. That was just how I knew how to do it before that. Bands I was in would just get in a room, somebody had an idea, and you would just play it and play it and play and come up with different ideas for what might be the chorus. And so hearing this, it was clearly that's what they were doing. You can't come up with this music in any other way. I mean, maybe, but it's not like a songwriter that started writing on their own. That's what, for Pearl Jam, for me, I liked it early on when it felt like the band had come up with the music, and then Eddie Vedder would take his time and write over it, and then it became where it seemed to me, I don't know, I'm projecting, but it seemed to me like they kind of got sick of each other, or they got some money and they wanted to spend as little time together as possible, and then they started bringing in their own songs. That there's a big difference between a song that someone just kind of writes on their own for the purpose of making a point with lyrically, or and then the band playing underneath it, and that's it. You don't really come up with these Badmotorfinger songs that way.
No, definitely not.
They're also pretty experimental, it seems like, in terms of like tuning. I wasn't really aware. The drop D thing I knew, and I think I heard about a song, was it Mind Riot, or one of the songs where all the strings are tuned to E.
And they were doing that before, I guess, with Ultra Mega OK, and a little bit less, I think, with Louder Than Love. But Ultra Mega OK and then Screaming Life, the previous EP, those tunings are all strange. I remember at the time trying to dig into that, and them, and, you know, like that era for me was, like most people, I was getting exposed to a lot, and you get really absorptive at 14, 15, 16 when you're listening to music. And I think I would credit that record or that group of records with getting me into sort of independent rock and things that I hadn't heard before, like My Bloody Valentine and Sonic Youth and all that stuff, and realizing, whoa, there's a whole world of things that are different tunings, you know. There's a couple of songs on Badmotorfinger that are like drop B. I think New Damage is drop B, and that's a fucking weird riff. I mean, if you try to unpack that riff, it's super strange. And there's like Sabbathy, bluesy elements, but there's a bunch of angular stuff all over that record that you just can't get with regular tunings. And I remember at the time trying to figure it out, and I couldn't figure it out until I learned that, you know.
I still don't even. I just don't do it where I like put my guitar in another tuning very often and just like come at it like a baby where I don't have shapes or anything. I just have to figure something out. It's fun to do. I just rarely.
Yeah, totally. I have a problem for me because I do it all the time, but I forget to write down what the tunings are. And so when I go back to play it or teach somebody for playing live or something, I have no fucking clue. So I did that whole Baltic record, which is sort of the heavy, slow metal record that I made last year.
Right, yeah.
And I was trying to figure out the tunings of it recently. I can't remember a thing. I just can't remember anything. So I don't think I could ever really play it again.
Oh my God.
I'm sure I could figure it out.
It's so crazy. It's hard enough to remember what you played in just standard tuning.
Yeah, no doubt.
But to have to add that variable, that's insane. Even just Rusty Cage, like it's 4, but it feels so quirky. I was listening to it, several times. I listened to it back in the day. There was the Johnny Cash cover and everything. It's just like, it's a straightforward kind of song. It's really not.
No.
That riff is so weird. At one point, it struck me in the last couple of days that, wait, if I had to like go cover this with a band, that would be a whole thing.
Right.
To have to work out where he enters vocally. I would have to sit down and write it out. It is weird.
And if you listen from the beginning of the song, if you think of that opening riff as starting on the 1, it doesn't. It starts on the 4. And then the drums come in at this weird spot. The entire time you're disoriented. And
totally.
But that's what is magical about it. I remember trying to think of like anything that struck me the same way. And I can't. And that's a great opening to a record, too, because you're like, whoa, what the fuck is happening? Yeah. And then the reverse reverb on the vocal coming in. And somebody had maybe heard that on a Sabbath or Zeppelin record prior to that, but it wasn't a totally common technique back then. And I mean, on Hendrix records it was. But, like at that time, those decisions weren't commonplace, And to think this was a major label record. Like they actually let this band make this crazy-ass record that, has pop elements and melodies, but it's a really strange record.
It really is. Yeah, just that intro is so dramatic. The panning, the guitars, the interplay, and then you don't know what to expect when you first hear those guitars together. You don't know that you're about to get something fast and heavy and rocking in the way that it does. And then you're right. I mean, that reverse reverb feels long and dramatic in a way that I hadn't heard. You are coming to production, sound, all of the aspects of making a record now from a very different place than when you were listening to the record when it came out. Is there stuff that strikes you that you were like, oh, I didn't know what I was hearing, or that feels dated, or that's funny, ahead of its time? Or
I was thinking about that exact question the other day when listening to the record, and it struck me as though I remember at the time thinking like it was the coolest sounding thing in the world to me. Yeah. And I even remember wanting to make music that sounded like that, just sonically. Because at that point I was already pretty in tune to I had a 4-track and I was already kind of understanding the recording process to a slight degree. I mean, the most basic degree. But I was interested in it, Yeah. And I remember wanting to... the mid-range scoop that record has was something that appealed to me at the time, like the smile curve, And listening to it now, in the context of the time, it's still one of the better sounding records, I think. Like Nirvana Nevermind has some interesting qualities, but the guitars are really brash and sort of popcorny to me. And 10 sort of sounds a little bit muddy, and I don't know, there's things about it that bum me out. But Badmotorfinger doesn't really bum me out, actually. Like I can remove myself from any of my typical recording critiques when I listen to it.
Yeah.
That said, awesome. I don't like the snare sound generally at all. I wish the snare was sort of a bit more broad, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
But, I mean, they're like small criticisms because it all feels really good. I wish the record had more bass, more bass guitar and more like lower mid-range, but like it doesn't preclude me from listening to it. In fact, I enjoy it a lot,
of course.
you know?
Of course. No, but, nitpicky, it's fun. I love it.
And I don't think, interestingly, unlike a lot of the records from that period, it doesn't suffer the tropes of most of those records. It really doesn't. It's actually kind of a testament to both Terry Date, the producer, and I think Ron St. Germain mixed it.
Yeah.
There's not big gated reverbs on stuff. And this is 1992. We weren't that far removed from Guns N' Roses, It was still...
Right.
I mean, God, what you said, like the Paula Abdul songs were huge and whatever else was big at the time. We weren't removed from that, like, those really disgusting production choices. And this record doesn't really have many of them, if any,
Yeah. It is shocking that this sold 4 million copies in the early 90s, that it was that big.
Yeah.
It's hard to get my mind back into the world where music is, you're getting it from far fewer places. It's less accessible in general because you can't get it on YouTube or streaming. You have to go buy, you have to really commit to what you're listening to unless you're listening to the radio or watching MTV. That's it.
Yeah.
And that this existed in a super popular way, in a mainstream way, along with Paula Abdul and all that, EMF and all that stuff. That's wild to me.
It's so crazy to think about. This record opened a lot of, like I said earlier, the doors into independent rock and like listening to Fugazi and the Chicago bands and all that stuff. It all came from not just Badmotorfinger, but like Badmotorfinger, Nevermind, and 10. That opened me into like REM and Fugazi and Jesus Lizard and all these other things that I had never heard before. And I started to identify labels and label sounds, which was kind of interesting. And I remember A&M was a big one for me because this was, of course, on A&M. And A&M also released Swerve Driver, Mezcal Head, which is a favorite of mine from roughly the same era. And, it brought me to Sub Pop. And, of course, that brought me to Discord. And, and so then you become aware of, like, labels and what labels are doing. And you sort of become loyal to a label. Or at the very least, you're like, oh, that label, Merge put that out, so I'm going to go listen to it, or whatever.
You trust them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Caroline. Caroline was big back then. So you would, Caroline put that record out. I'm going to absolutely check that out,
I forgot.
Which was kind of an interesting thing. That probably exists now. I mean, I guess it does exist now. It's hard for me because I'm on the inside now, so I don't see it from the same perspective. But I don't know if it exists in quite the same way.
Yeah, I think that it's probably harder to think of like a particular group or community of musicians in the same way. I mean, you hear, as much as I'm saying that Badmotorfinger sounds different from the other grunge bands, you can hear things where you realize that they were in the same scene and they said that they were going to see each other all the time. I think it's like the bridge part of in Rusty Cage, in the first song with the Phillips head line and stuff, he goes down to that low register and it's like, oh, this is the vocal sound that everyone just put on Eddie Vedder. That everyone said this is his thing. It's Phillips head to my brain, and that thing that they were all doing it.
That thing that you do really well, by the way, when you're imitating it. It's so good.
Listen to some Pearl Jam, I can do it. I like that. I like having just that sense of community. Yep. There's just so many bands now, too. Before this time, I think there was something prohibitive about being in a band and putting out music. You kind of had to have a label. It was more expensive to make and put out music and to go play shows.
And you can't discount that, like, in 92 or whenever Sub Pop started, which was probably, 87 or 88?
Yeah.
Bruce Pavitt, you probably can't ever make an argument that guy did it for the money. You know what I mean? So he was purely a music fan because there was no way an independent label could reasonably make the argument that, oh, yeah, I'm going to start this label and it's going to make me millions of dollars. It was clearly a labor of love. Unlike today, where not that you'll make $1 million, but it's so easy to start a label now that anybody could feasibly do it. I mean, it wasn't easy to start a record label in the late 1980s, you know?
Yeah.
It's got to be super difficult.
You can't throw stuff up online. You have to make all these physical products and figure out how to get them to people.
Yeah. And you have to rely on this really intricate network of magazines. I guess in our day we called them zines, you know? And
Right.
At the most, you had something like Spin Magazine, which might, if you're lucky, touch a review of an independent record, you know? But beyond that, it was like you had to purely rely on networks of people that were interested in the same stuff around the country, but it required phone calls, traveling, lots of investment. There was nothing about this that was a money-making venture, and that's probably why independent labels release such amazing records, because they cared about that part of it, you know?
Right.
And even A&M, you look at A&M, like they released this record. So they must have cared on some level. That's why I say it was like the last great golden age of big labels that I think probably changed directly after this stuff, because like this particular group of music, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, I guess to a degree, Screaming Trees, and maybe Mudhoney to a little degree. When label executives saw that this weird sort of dirty rock shit could make that much money, then the whole thing changed. You know what I mean? Then like it all became about beans at that point.
Yeah.
And not that it wasn't ever about beans. It always was about beans. But, you know, there was a different calculation, you know?
Yeah. It's funny that this took you to independent stuff. It took me longer to get there because I kind of stuck with radio, with like where big labels were going. So I went from this into just the copies of this. I listened to Silverchair and I listened to Bush and all the stuff that came from this. And it took me, when I went to college and started playing in a band with people that were listening to Fugazi, and I mean, I knew who Fugazi was and stuff, but I was just still through high school. I went to college in 97, so the next few years, a bunch of years after this record came out, but you know, through the first like 3 or 4 big records from these bands, I was just sticking around with this and the big stuff, and I knew who Sonic Youth was. I knew who some of the smaller bands were, but I didn't go. My brother is older than me, but he didn't really care about music that much. He wasn't curious to the point that he wanted to trace down bands and find out where stuff came from. I didn't talk to people in record stores, like the cooler older guys or whatever, and I already knew these bands, and I knew what was on the radio and MTV, and I liked that stuff, and so then I wasn't going to go take a chance buying a bunch of, like, I remember buying a Meat Puppets record after they were on Unplugged with Nirvana.
Oh yeah.
Think, oh, okay, cool, an indie band that I can now trust because Nirvana gave me their blessing, and I thought it was pretty sloppy. You know, I noticed that it was like an indie record, and I was like, I don't know. I like the big pop sound from these.
It's funny you say that, because I definitely had a similar thing where the sparseness of independent rock records in terms of their production or their quality was a little bit of a turnoff to me at the time. Yeah. And then I came to love it later, but it was definitely, I noticed that, like, oh yeah, the guitars aren't doubled, or what, you know, just little things like that, or things that I couldn't quite like quantify, but I knew were different in a way that made them sound cheaper, you know, and like less quality. Like I remember hearing Nirvana Bleach, and Bleach has that. It's very starkly different from Nevermind sonically, you know, and the equation being, oh wow, it's cheaper and less good. But it's not at all.
No. Yeah, I could hear that, but I couldn't quantify it in any way. I didn't know what that meant. Yeah. It just felt like I equated earlier records to that sound, kind of. You know, like someone's first record sounds like that, and then their second or third sounds bigger. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way at all, but I think that's how I sort of equated it in my mind.
It usually is that way.
I guess it is.
And then somewhere around the fourth record, they try to come back to what they did in the first record, but they're not the same people, so it's nowhere near the same.
I talked to John Maslasky about the third STP record.
Oh, yeah.
And it just felt like some of the bands at that time, they would get experimental with their third record. The first one would blow up, and then the second one would even bigger, and then the third one, it's like, let's rent a house somewhere and go in with no songs and no ideas, and let's see what happens. And then the fourth one, it was like, oh God, let's sound like our first record again.
Yeah. It's funny, I feel like that template comes from Zeppelin. Like if you look at Zeppelin's career, they had 10 proper records releases, right? So you can sort of map a lot of artists onto that template. The first record's really sort of intense and raw, and the second record gets a little more contained, but really still cool. And then the third record, all bets are off. They fucking experiment, and most people hate it, except 20 years later, everybody thinks it's a masterpiece. And, it's like the same template all over again. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's a bummer that at the time that people can't recognize. It's a case-by-case thing. It doesn't happen every time, but it seems like it's happened with bands where people aren't encouraging of that weird experimental vibe, because at the time, then they could push it further and you see where they might want to go. But at the time, people are like, that doesn't sound like what I come to expect from you. So then they makes them go back. It feels like it can be very
Radiohead's the best example, and I'm sure you would agree, of a band that actually developed and actually threw all the rules out and then did new stuff pretty much every time.
Yeah, I try not to bring them up whenever possible because they always come to mind. It's just the trajectory of their career as a band is pretty unparalleled.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. It's amazing to think that the same band who made Kid A, or OK Computer for that matter, made Pablo Honey. It's crazy. I mean, I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but it's so true. It's totally bananas to think about that.
Because if you think of any other band like that, what they would have to have done from their first record, who else sounds that drastically different, where they can just throw out their first record. It's like it's not even part of their
maybe
catalog
the Beatles, maybe.
Sure.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking.
But even that's debatable, because there's stuff on their first record, the first releases rather, that still, like, their DNA, it traveled through the DNA. You know what I mean? But Radiohead, I feel like there's very little DNA from that first record into, say, King of Limbs. Like, very little.
Right. Yeah, it just felt like they just kept pushing to me. I'm sure there's people have talked about this a ton, but just in my mind, when I think about it, it's just that they were constantly are still searching, and whereas a band like Pearl Jam or whatever, I think they got to a level where it's like, cool, we're happy, we're comfortable, we can play a whole bunch of shows, and people still love these songs, and we don't need to spend so much time together. And in our free time, we don't really want to like practice music, or like one of us isn't going to go become a classical composer just because they love it and just want to push things farther and farther and farther. There's just a special thing. Back to Soundgarden, I hadn't mentioned, I think that this Badmotorfinger, maybe part of the reason why I didn't devour it as much early on was I'm pretty sure this was my original Columbia House order. One of those like 10 CDs because
Did you actually pay for them?
I think I did.
Oh man, you're like one of the 3 in the world that actually paid for them.
I can't, well, they said it was like a penny for the first 10 or something
like
and
that,
then so maybe not. I stayed in it. I remember getting the like postcards. I wouldn't check the mail. I was 12 or whatever. I didn't care. But in the mail, you would get like a postcard or whatever, some form saying this is your next CD and it's going to cost full price or whatever, $19.99. Unless you send this back in the mail saying you don't want it or you're buying something else. You were obligated after that certain 10 for 1 penny to then stay in it a certain amount of time.
What a crazy model.
My parents might have had to. It totally is. It's insane. My parents may have had to shut it down or something. They may have called them and like just shut, because I wouldn't check the mail. I was irresponsible and not sending it back. And so there was a couple times where we got a CD and then they were charged and it was like, I don't even want this. Like, what the hell are you doing? Get out of this thing. But I didn't even know what it was. I was a tennis player when I was young, and I remember being in Paducah, Kentucky, and playing a tournament, and one of the friends that he lived there, I went to his house, and he told me about Columbia House, And if you referred somebody,
Oh, yeah.
you would get like 3 free CDs or something. So he was pushing me into it. And it was, it's just a penny. You get 10.
Right.
And I don't even think I knew Pearl Jam, or I had probably heard Smells Like Teen Spirit or something. But I remember him showing me the list, and you should get this, you should get this. And I know that Nevermind was one of them, and 10 was one of them, and Blood Sugar Sex Magic was one of them. I'd love to be able to track down what all of them were, but I feel certain that this was one of them too. So it was probably one of those things where they all arrived at the same time. So it wasn't like, you used to buy a CD and that was the new thing that you had for maybe months, and like you said, you had it in your stereo for a year.
It probably that's probably not hyperbole. It was probably a year. Yeah. I
mean, I had it come along with 10 and Nevermind, and I was just hooked on those for a long time.
You did the grunge monthly special.
Totally.
I think I probably fucked one or more of my parents on that Columbia House deal, probably multiple times. I probably did my name, and then my mom's name, and then my dad's name, and my aunt's name. I'm sure, I have no doubt that I completely screwed 15 people, because I never paid a dime for that stuff. And I would always, I would see them in the back of TV Guide or whatever. I would see that thing in the list. I want that. It was so bad.
So the later, weirder songs of the record were certainly lost on me early on, and then I didn't really come back to it later on. So this has been not a new, but a really fresh experience. I had heard the record multiple times, but not the way that I thought. I went back and listened to the older ones too, and it does seem really clear how they honed in on songwriting.
Oh yeah.
To me, this one's kind of right in the middle. It's like a sweet spot. But I like Super Unknown.
Oh yeah,
as well.
Super Unknown's to me, it's a great record. I don't think I ever connected with it. When did that come out? 94?
Something like that, or 95.
Yeah, I was just graduating high school, and I think I was just so invested in other music at that point that I remember I bought it and I liked it, but it still didn't have the same connection to me for whatever reason. To me, Badmotorfinger is sort of like, it's like their Dark Side of the Moon. I know that's a heavy comparison, but you know what I mean? Totally. Just in terms of the arc and trajectory of, they came upon a place, and it seemed to all sort of perfectly come together on Badmotorfinger to me. And much like Led Zeppelin 4 or maybe Sabbath's, Volume 4 or something, just to me, there's not a bad song on the record. I listened to it front to back. I would never change anything about it. And there are very few records like that. Kid A, Sgt. Pepper. I mean, the classics, Pet Sounds. And I mean, it'll be funny probably for people who work with me to hear me say that I think Badmotorfinger is one of the great rock records of all time, but I really do.
You mentioned it, I was caught off guard and then started listening, and I was like, oh yeah, I can hear you being excited. I heard the sax, how
fucking
songs.
Weird is that, man? It's insane, both on Mind Riot and on Room 1,000 Years Wide. It's these crazy sax. Oh, and Drawing Flies. There's this weird horn section, which I don't think actually caught my ear until listening to it now. When I was a kid, the horn part in Drawing Flies, I don't think I ever registered it. And now listening, I heard that the other day and was like, whoa, that's a wildly crazy horn part. And who thought of that? These were crazy weird decisions. Yeah. And a band like Nirvana definitely came from more of the punk thing than Soundgarden did. Soundgarden was coming from, I think, that Crimson Zappa progressive rock thing that I sort of grew up with. My dad listened to a lot of weird music, like Jethro Tull and King Crimson and Zappa and all that stuff. So I was my predilections already lie in the sort of weird, spacey, atmospheric, abstract shit. And those sorts of things, like the sax, especially at the end of Mind Riot when he's just freaking out, is that's brilliant to me.
They were way more focused on creating a sonic landscape than a Nirvana or a Pearl Jam or something that were trying to just convey a song, and it's tight pop.
Yeah, and you really go into the world. You put on Badmotorfinger and you're in that world for 45 minutes or however long the record is. It's crazy.
You mentioned that it's kind of like their Dark Side of the Moon or whatever. I had a friend that played in a band with it. Just struck a memory of him talking about certain records with bands where you can hear that they were going through something, or they're hit upon something, and one that always stuck out for me, we listened to a lot of Fugazi together, and there was something about In on the Kill Taker, the Fugazi record. There was something about that record that made what he said hold weight. They were like angrier on that record, or something. It was like something had gone on in their lives that it was like a turning point. It felt like, I have no idea if that's true or not, but at least from a figuring out what they wanted to be as a band, that is the case here with Soundgarden.
Yeah, it's like the landing on a place. Like, you could tell they were all in it for the same reasons. They all wanted similar things out of it, and they just landed in a place. And when a band does that, if the band is good, obviously, it results in a record that becomes a pillar, for somebody. It becomes a real pillar of a thing. This one clearly to me is a pillar. And it like sits, I could, if I put together a bundle of 20 records, this would certainly be in it,
That's crazy. That's awesome.
And when I heard there's a special edition Badmotorfinger that I owned a copy of, as David Nagler can attest to, that had a cover of She's a Politician and Into the Void, the Black Sabbath song, which is amazing. The cover of that is incredible. And The Girl I Want, or The Girl You Want, the Devo song. They covered Devo.
Oh, yeah.
It's like such a cool, it was like a second disc at the time, and now I'm sure it's streaming, but it was a second disc and it had these extra songs on it. It was awesome. And I think they were from the same sessions.
Oh, that's cool. I think they put out like a massive thing with like 6 discs or 4 discs or something at least that's on streaming with outtakes and
right, with the studio outtake stuff. Yeah.
And there's demos, and you have to be really, the arrangements are basically the same. It feels like they rehearsed it before going into the studio and then call that a demo.
I hate that shit. I just have such a distaste in my mouth for that stuff.
I mean, you have to be the biggest fan. Even if you are the biggest fan, it's probably not worth your time. But if you really, really get off on hearing like a different drum fill in the particular place, it comes back to where you have to like know that music so well that it's in your bones, and then you can maybe get a glimpse of the player or the personality that by hearing what they would have done in the same situation. But you really have to be. You
and I can make a record of stuff like that because there are a million times where we've decided to change drum fills in something we've made, right?
Yeah, I love that. No, that's man, I can't even. I could gush and gush just about working with you and that being able to nerd out over my own drum parts when I'm recording and knowing that there's someone that understands what I'm going for, and there's like a kinship, where I'm coming from, whether you agree exactly with the part or not. Yeah. I feel like you do. I feel supported, and I know that you heard it, even though you're hearing everything else going on, and I can check in with. That's always just such a great studio feeling at the Isacon. But I think that partly ties into like, I love having that in the studio, but I loved having it when I was in a band that would practice 3 times a week or twice a week or whatever and just play the same stuff over and over again. You really get to know each other as players, and you really get to know the songs and the parts and everything, and you can really nerd out in the same way over piecing something together. Totally. There's the part at the end of Outshined that I think they took out in the radio edit where the band is playing the outshine, but he sings the chorus part again. Oh, yeah. Show me that is such a thing that you would only come up with if you're making it up in the room together. And the way they get out of it is so weird and cool. That is a weird moment, right? The way they come out of that. I actually still don't really understand it. Yeah. You're talking about where they go, outshine, outshine, outshine. And then they keep going on that riff, right? And then he goes into the chorus vocal thing. Show me it's like a double chorus. Yes. I'd like to say. It's like a strange turnaround. Yeah, totally weird turnaround. You don't think to do that if you're like session players, if you're trying to get this song down in a day in the studio or something. Yeah. You don't try that. I mean, maybe it's not even that tasteful. It's certainly not approaching music from a let's serve the song standpoint. Yeah, right. It's very much an anticipate your brother in this change that's coming up kind of thing that you only get, like you're saying, from playing with somebody in the room for an extended period of time. Yeah, and where the goal is partly to do something that you enjoy yourselves.
Yeah.
You're playing with this band a lot, and you've probably played this song a lot. You took a lot of time coming up with it, and it doesn't feel like something where, like I said with metal, where they're trying to be super impressive.
Right.
It was just, we want to do a double chorus, and it's going to be more fun if we don't just play the chorus again.
Totally.
My college band, the guy that I was talking about with Fugazi and stuff, we were huge fans of them, and I just remember the songs were fairly simple. I haven't gone back and listened to that music in a long time, but it was really, Discord inspired stuff. And I just remember we would just spend nights in college, like just go at like 5 p.m. after classes and stuff, and just play, the two of us, until midnight, at least a couple times a week, maybe 3, and just play the same thing, but just like, okay, we have this song and I want to get into the chorus. I don't want it to be cut and paste another verse and chorus ever. So we would just figure out another way to get into the chorus.
Right.
If there's 3 choruses of the song, it was fun, and I think it was cool. It wasn't, like I said, serving a basic message of presenting a song.
Yeah.
But it was exploring how you different ways to put a song forth. You know
what's funny is I never really had, when I was younger, I was in a band. It was called Capital Burnout. That was in high school, around this time that we're talking about. We played in the room a lot together, but I can't remember really. The only thing I remember markedly in my head was that in my dad's basement, that's where we played. So I had the drum set up, I had the 4-track and my amps and all that stuff. And the only thing I can really remember from that time is that my band made a demo on 4-track, but the night we finished like working on it, everybody else went home, and then I replaced everything. I replaced the drums and the vocals and the bass, and then like played it for everybody the next day and was like, hey, check out what we did. I mixed it. And they were all just like, we didn't play that. And so I've always sort of been that guy, and I think I'll always be that guy. I don't have many of those like band in the room situations, except for Ultram, but that's purely completely improvised. So there's no like parts to work out. But aside from like playing with somebody like Heather, who we both play with, or Jesse, we're not, or at least I'm not writing with him, for extended periods of time. So I have very few of those experiences. And I don't know if I've just always been a fucking control freak, and that's why I can never do that. But I've always longed for that. I've always wanted to like be in a room with somebody and work on a riff for 3 hours and figure out how to make that work into something else. And it's just never been a part of my musical upbringing. It's crazy.
I love it. As you get older, it's just harder to do. It's just time is more valuable, And I mean, that's partly who you are. You learn to be able to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
And you also learned how to be more efficient. So you don't really have to do that.
Well, that was it. It was like I would look at the drummer, and like I would want him to do things that I heard on Badmotorfinger or something, and he couldn't do them. So I would learn how to do them and then like replace them later, And that's just how I just started making music, as like properly making music.
That's way more efficient, and it leads to you being the like, person that you are that owns a studio, and you can have one musician come with ideas and you guys can figure it all out yourself because you've done that. And that's another thing. I mean, you mentioned Ultram. It seems like a different way of getting at the same. It's a different process, but so you improvise stuff and then you go back and you find what in there to cut up and put together.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So that's approaching it in a different way, but it feels like getting to the same place and somehow.
Yeah, you're looking for the same emotions and the things to hit you in the same way. And it's just like collection and then curating afterwards.
Right.
Which is fun for me, because I can still like direct it as much as I want to, or Matthew, the other guy who does a lot of the engineering, we can just like both do the things that we're sort of genetically predisposed to doing, cutting up and controlling the message, but let everybody express as they express. And I don't know, it really appeals to me. No, but I've always wanted to have a rock band that was like a rock band. I've always wanted to be in a, like the Project Baltic that I did. It's all me, but I've always wanted a project like that. I've always wanted to make super heavy music with other people in the room and playing with them and working stuff out with them. And I've just never had it in my life. And I've always wanted to have like potentially a singer that sounded anywhere near as good as Chris Cornell, you know, for that stuff. But of course, like Baltic's all instrumental and, you know, I sing, but Snowflake is a very different thing than something like Baltic or Ultram for that matter. But I've always wanted to have a rock band that was like sort of a 4-piece classic rock band, you know?
Yeah.
Never done.
I guess I was sort of thinking of Snowflake as that way, but you made the records fast, right? And
generally, yeah. The record took a long time to write, but I made the record fast, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I had that. I didn't know how much I craved that I would get back to the point where I really wanted that again because that was just kind of all I knew. I didn't even understand. A little bit later after college when I went back to Kentucky and was in a band, I remember trying to impart that process on a band that I was in that was really a songwriter and a backing band. I just was like, no, we got to play this song more. I was the one making the songs into like 6-minute things, like extending the intro and stuff and trying to orchestrate, when really like the thing to do would be to serve the songwriter's song. But he was talking about, we made a record and we thought that it was important to work out who wrote what or who gets credit for what. I remember the producer wanted points or whatever. That was never going to matter, but we had to have like a band meeting about it and stuff. But I was getting into an argument about who wrote what on the song because I didn't even understand it. Before in bands I was in, it was just everybody wrote the song because we came up with it in the room together. But no, of course, the songwriter that already had pretty much the song.
Right.
I just didn't even get it. I didn't even know that that's how things were done.
Yeah, it always struck me reading record credits when I was younger. I had the original impression like, oh, the whole band does these songs. And then you would look at, say, Zeppelin, and you would just see Page Plant.
Right.
Occasionally you would see Jones, Bonham, but very rarely, you know, and I would, wow, so really I can just do this on my own? And I think that was the root of that, like, yeah, I'll just do this on my own thing.
I had that with In Utero. I remember Dave Grohl had songwriting credit on Scentless Apprentice, the don't and it was, I guess I read somewhere that it was because he played that beat and then Kurt came up with the riff over that. I was like, oh, so that's what you do for songwriting credit as a drummer? So I should just start playing if we're rehearsing. I should start playing beats, and then if somebody makes something up, then I get songwriting credit. I wasn't that worried about it, but I just thought that was
Grohl should certainly get credit for Smells Like Teen Spirit because every fucking drummer from 1991 forward like played that beat. Oh my
gosh. Unbelievable. It reminded me actually when you were talking about your friends and them going home at night and you replacing the stuff. It wasn't a 4-track thing, but people used to come over to my parents' basement because I had the drums and we jam in there and do 4-track stuff. But after maybe late in high school or back in college, and it's gone now, I wish I had digitized it or something, I found a camcorder where a dude from high school, we were probably freshmen, I'd probably been playing drums for a few months, and he had a Squier Strat or whatever, and he came over and we set up the video recorder, so it's just him and me facing the video recorder like dorks in the basement, and we started to play Smells Like Teen Spirit, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I rushed it to the point that it turned into like speed punk. It was just he starts off exactly, you know, down and I come in and you can see him being like, what the fuck's going on? I thought I was fine. I thought it was just like, I didn't even understand tempo. It was just play the beat at all costs. And
that's so exactly right.
Ridiculous.
Play it at all costs no matter what.
So ridiculous. I like to look at what the singles were and try to answer the question like, could anything else have been a single? I mean, it's pretty clear from just like a catchy standpoint, a radio standpoint, that, you know, Jesus Christ Pose and Outshined and Rusty Cage are the ones.
I think Somewhere could have been a single.
Totally. Yeah, that was a catchy one that stood out to me right away. It didn't back then, but Room 1,000 Years Wide struck me now as like, that is, I mean, I love it how it is, but just thinking in terms of how could this be like catchy, like for the masses or whatever, but especially at that time when, I mean, these are weird songs. Any of the ones that already were singles, it made me think about how I evaluated songs back then.
Sure.
Because when I first got this, I maybe hadn't even started playing guitar yet.
Yeah.
So when you don't know anything about the recording process, who's playing what, like I didn't even know where some of these sounds are coming from.
Right.
It didn't occur to me to know, how do you evaluate songs, which is so funny. There's like whether it's you think it's cool, there's an image to the band, or there's like certainly a catchy thing, like a catchy chorus,
Yeah.
whether you know anything about what's going on or not, catchy melody, cool riff or something, you like a song. But that's part of the reason why I think maybe the full record didn't resonate as much with me back then. I didn't give it a full amount of time, but I also didn't have as much of a way to evaluate what I liked about it, because I wasn't trying to play this stuff. If I had gone back to it later on in college, I might have been like, oh, this is exactly the kind of stuff that me and my friends are trying to do in our Discord kind of band. And I should be, like I was trying to play beats like Jesus Christ Pose and stuff. I mean, I'd heard some other people do it, but I hadn't heard it in that same way. I never figured that beat out. I didn't come back to it as a drummer at the time and be like, oh, this is something I should know. But anyway, so for Room 1,000 Years Wide, it struck me that could have been very close to being a single as well. Like I feel like that so. Tomorrow Begat Tomorrow chorus is super catchy. Yeah. Even the like wow 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 guitar riff that's a catchy thing.
Absolutely.
It just seemed like there's something sort of metal about the riff,
the chunks,
yeah, those things that maybe that's part of it. And I mean, this is just a thought exercise. It doesn't matter at all. But I was just thinking about it today, listening, that if I wanted to make this a hit, I would just maybe like smooth out those chunky things, just like a straight eighth note. And this is probably like recency bias. This is what a band would do now. You just like straight eighths to just drive it forward like that and not have it feel metally. And then just like get to the sections quicker. Just verse, and then that chorus is catchy enough. I think that
it does. It's pretty languid how that song builds, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the riff that's a pretty monolithic riff. It happens a lot during the song. And I remember that when I first heard it, I loved it. I loved that riff. But yeah, it happens a lot, for sure.
Yeah.
But there's that thing, I think you're right, that they would have straightened out the eighths and maybe like gone to the sections quicker. But there's also that weird, I guess it happens in the first verse. It's like a buzzing B guitar. It's like bending. Yeah. It's such a weird sound, and I think that probably made it too fucking strange.
Turn off. Yeah.
But like Jesus Christ Pose is a strange single. I mean, I think I said this earlier, but it's like, that's a crazy weird single. Yeah. And it's also the religious thing you would think would preclude it from being a single, and it didn't. I mean, suppose it's smart that was the first single, because had I heard Outshined first, I probably would have been less inclined to buy the record. I liked Outshined a lot, but not the same way that I like Jesus Christ Posed. Outshined is clearly a pop song. It's in other clothing, but it's a pop song.
Yeah.
Rusty Cage, to a degree, is also a pop song, but I think that's a lot about like breaking free and the lyrical message of that stuff. But like Jesus Christ Pose is so not a pop song.
Yeah.
In every metric, it's very totally opposed to what you'd expect from a lead single off a record.
Right. But there was controversy in the video and the song itself. Yeah. And then there's like a very clear image to it as well. When I think of people evaluating songs, there's also the lyrical aspect. I mean, Rusty Cage, you can take something from that and you can picture what he's talking about, breaking free, like you said. Outshined, you have to get a little deeper. You don't hear it on the radio and know what he's talking about. But Jesus Christ Pose, it's like you can see that. Even if you just heard it on the radio for the first time, I think that will stick with you. And then if you've seen Chris Cornell do that kind of thing, and he's got the hair, and in my mind back then he's just always shirtless with long black shorts.
And those tall Doc Martens. He had the tall like knee-high Doc Martens that I wanted so bad when I was 14. Oh my God.
When I was picturing singles in my mind, that scene that we were talking about, he was shirtless with long black shorts. I know that's not the case, but that would be so funny in my mind. That's how I was picturing him. And I was like,
since I literally watched it last night, I can tell you he's got a black T-shirt on. But in the next scene that he's in, which is Soundgarden playing at the club, he's shirtless with his shirt wrapped around his waist and doing the thing, whatever he's doing.
Yeah.
So he's definitely shirtless in that movie.
Did you ever see them live?
I did. I saw them twice. I saw them at Lollapalooza 92, I think.
Oh, wow.
And which was pretty wild. And I saw them a couple years later, I think during the Super Unknown tour, I saw them.
Yeah.
So it must have been 95-ish. And they were headlining, and I forget who opened up for them. But the Lollapalooza show, it was pretty awesome. That was, I think, Lush played, and Pearl Jam played, Soundgarden played, Ministry played, Jesus and Mary Chain played, Body Count played. And Body Count, Cop Killer. If I remember that shit.
Yeah, I remember
and
that.
I don't remember because I went to the Lollapalooza the year before too with my dad, and Jane's Addiction headline. Oh, I think so. Jane's Addiction must have played the 92 one. Yeah, but either way, it was a crazy, crazy show. So crazy. And like to see Soundgarden when I was that deeply embedded in that record at that point was pretty impactful to me.
Yeah. Did you have to travel to go to Lollapalooza? Where were you?
I think we saw that at Saratoga Performing Arts Center. So it was a couple hours away.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's right, because the Jones Beach one, because they did them at Jones Beach too, but they didn't do it there that year in New York because of some sewage thing, which is not surprising.
Right.
And the closest one for us was Saratoga, which was a couple hours away.
Yeah, funny. I had this thought beforehand too, that there's so much. I mean, we've hung out, we've worked together, but I mean, there's plenty that it would be great for me to catch up with you. I listen to Mark Maron and think I'd love to hear Dan on here and just get like a full deep dive into your full history, and I've heard some of that in this, but it was just funny to me, like, okay, I'm finally going to sit down one-on-one and talk to Dan, and it's going to be about this one Soundgarden record. There's so much more that I'd be very interested to ask you about, but we'll get there.
That's after the stream.
Yeah. I never saw them live. That was another thought that I had, is that it would be a way into some of these weirder songs than what I was listening to at the time. I think it would have made everything a little more clear what was happening to actually see it performed.
Yeah.
And now there's you can watch tons of performance videos and stuff. But then you really couldn't. You could go buy VHS maybe if they put one out. I don't know if Soundgarden did at the time.
Occasionally there was like, I forget, there was that one big something Pink festival, and MTV broadcast that. I remember watching them live, and I think that was in Seattle. Pink Pop or something like that. And,
Pink Pop,
and I do remember, 120 Minutes or Headbangers Ball would occasionally have live performance videos. Mm-hmm. And I definitely saw them on those once or twice. One of the craziest shows I saw around that time was Smashing Pumpkins opened, Pearl Jam played second, and Red Hot Chili Peppers played third. And I always hated Red Hot. I mean, I hated that fucking band so much and still do. It's one of the few bands, like if somebody puts Red Hot Chili Peppers on, I will walk out of the room, full stop. But we left actually during the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But Pearl Jam was great, and Smashing Pumpkins was great. It was the first time I had heard Smashing Pumpkins, and I think that was right when Gish came out, and it was like, whoa, this band is crazy.
Wow.
And then I ended up not really caring for them much longer after that, but that first record was cool.
It was Siamese Dream for me, but I saw them after that record came out in '94 or whatever, and it brought things. Some of the later songs on that record are a little longer, a little weirder maybe, and not to this extent of this record, but it just brought things more into focus, where it elevated how much I like the record and the songs and the band. Just being able to see, there's that same thing of how do you evaluate this music when you can see it being made. And I had that with 9 Inch Nails too.
Yep.
I would say I like to debate whether it's their best record. I think that you have pretty definitively answered that question.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I think Super Unknown has 4th of July is one of the to me one of the best rock songs ever written. I think that's a fucking brilliant song.
Yeah.
And I still think for all of its overplayed saturation, Black Hole Sun is a great song. And
totally. Fell on Black Days.
Yeah, Fell on Black Days is another one. And Fell on Black Days the lyrics of that song are great, super relatable if you struggle with depression or anxiety. But Badmotorfinger is like a full, and it could be just simply that I came to it at a point in my life, like the difference between being 13 and 14 was probably, I mean, if you look at anybody's record collection who does what we do, that are lifers, And from 13 to 14, the changes in what you're listening to are probably the biggest changes you've ever experienced in your life and will ever experience.
Yeah.
So, like when it hit me at that point in time, it was like the confluence of my mind opening, my mind wanting to be opened. I mean, I hate saying this, but I was experimenting with drugs. I was experimenting with smoking, all of those things happening at the same time. And, whatever hits you then probably has a special place, no matter what, in your lifelong sort of journey, And that record for sure is like, I can't really think of another record aside from maybe Ritual de lo Habitual.
Oh, yeah.
Which is another favorite of mine still to this day. But I can't think of many other records that were contemporaneous to my growing up that affected me in quite the same way. There were a few. I mean, there's a few of them, but Badmotorfinger is definitely one of them. So I've got to call it their best record.
Yeah, sure. That's awesome. I mean, I could see for a particular fan or whatever thinking that Super Unknown was for the reasons you mentioned. But yeah, I agree with you. There's a few songs that take me out of Super Unknown. Spoon Man. At some point, I liked it when the record came out, and I had it. And there was a certain point a long time ago, I don't know when it was, but I'd had the record for a long time, that I listened to Spoon Man, and it just hit me as the dumbest song. Like and it really hasn't again. It's like, this sounds a little silly and whatever, but there was just a particular I wish I could go back to that feeling that I viscerally hated it. At this one point, I was like, this is so stupid.
What's funny is watching Singles last night. I don't know if this will register with you, but there's all those cut scenes in Singles. There's like 4 or 5 of them where there's just like a static still shot and then a kind of a chapter subheading. And on one of them, there's an acoustic version that I think is Chris Cornell himself of the Spoon Man riff. And Singles was 92, I think. So clearly that song had been rattling around for some years before it came out on Super Unknown, which I found really interesting. And I didn't register that until watching it last night. I was like, oh, wow, that's Spoon Man. Crazy.
Yeah.
And there's a live thing I heard once of Soundgarden, and it was, I think, from Louder Than Love tour, where Chris Cornell says to the audience, "This is for Spoon Man." So but it wasn't Spoon Man; it was a different song. But my assumption is that Spoon Man is about some dude who they knew in Seattle who was maybe like a fixture.
Yeah, I think that was known back then because I remember the video had the dude playing. I think he played on the recording. Maybe
that could be right.
When there's a breakdown and there's spoons. I think that was the whole thing around that single coming out and stuff. And I think there was a video of the guy playing the spoons
where Chris Cornell goes, "Come on, come on, come on, knock it off."
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Which is probably one of the more distasteful things he's done in his career, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
All the respect, but I mean, they can't all be good, right?
No. There's the good isn't as good as it is without some of the bad,
Right, exactly. And sometimes, if lyrics are that specific, you're taking a risk. It's like, it's cool to pay tribute to this guy, but I don't know, come together with your hands. And it's just, and when it's funny, Morgan told me recently, talking about music, she was like, don't tell people what a song's about.
Right.
Let them have their thing. So if you know exactly what he's saying, then it's much easier for it to become trite, I think. The line, if it's so specific and you can't really take it and apply it to any other experience that you have.
I think that's why I never got into artists like Bruce Springsteen. It was like way too blue collar, like, struggle in the streets, me and Jane got to get out of here because our daddy's on my case. And, it's like,
right.
I don't need more of that shit in my life. I want to hear about goblins and fucking, slaves and chains and like crazy shit, Or like space travel. That was a big one for me. I wanted space travel.
Ziggy. No, that's interesting. We haven't really dug into the lyrics much, but I love doing that because everybody has their own taste for them.
Yeah.
Well, a joke that I thought of while listening to this was that we were on a Zoom call the other night with just some friends, and some of my friends in Milwaukee had they just got a house, but they'd been looking at houses before the quarantine and stuff, and so they'd been touring a lot of houses and seeing a lot of these like live, love, these little signs that people put up, that these crate and barrel little things and
written on chalkboard with the filigree and all that.
Yes, exactly. And the silly font, the flowery font that's, eat, pray, love, or whatever they say. For some reason, I've heard this line a million times, but I was thinking of that and heard the grass is always greener where the dogs are shitting. I just thought that would be a hilarious one of those signs, like in a flowery, like a model home.
Yeah. It's funny that I totally forgot about that line until you said it. When I was a kid, I don't think I've really listened to lyrics that much. It's something Josh Kaufman and I have talked about a bunch. Like, he's particularly concerned about lyrics, and I am now as an adult, but when I was a kid, I don't think they really hit me in the same way. It was more about the world the music was creating. So I never really paid attention so much to the lyrics on Badmotorfinger at that point in time. I mean, maybe to some degree I did, but they felt abstract to me for the most part. And then when I went and listened recently, I realized like most of the lyrics aren't embarrassingly bad like I expected them to be. I expected them to be like, oh God, they're pretty rough, but they weren't. I mean, there are a couple lines in there that are like, I don't know, whatever, maybe, third grade poetry, but there's a lot of good, I think, interesting wordplay.
I feel exactly the same. That's funny. I got to talk to Josh for this too, because that keeps coming up for me too, that I keep asking the question, do lyrics matter? Because I didn't care about them at the time either.
Right,
and for people whose like tastes don't really evolve, they like the music that they like, and they listen to the radio, and music just doesn't mean as much to them. They maybe never, I'm not trying to belittle anyone in terms of their taste in music, but it just maybe I've had an evolution like that where I listen to the lyrics more and a song means more to me if the lyrics are well crafted. But I think for a lot of listeners, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Side note about Tucker Carlson about he picked Hootie and the Blowfish, I think just to talk shit and have fun. I was going through the lyrics of Let Her Cry was a huge song.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that song. And you could probably come up with some of the lyrics in your head, and you know the chorus, you have an idea of what it's about. That shit makes zero sense. I can't wait to go off. It is completely unintelligible, and it is hilarious to me because it's sold like 21 million records or whatever.
Right.
Unbelievable. But with lyrics on this record, I thought, and he said it in an interview, he's going for imagery and stuff. I think that's great. There are images. I think Jesus Christ pose definitely stands out. When you're singing with that much, I don't want to say bravado, but when there's that much drama in the way he can and does sing, lines can come off a little sillier. Like for whatever reason, that where the dogs are shitting line struck me as a little sillier, just because it's so heavy. The way it's being presented is so heavy every time.
The lyrics for Mind Riot, I remember being pretty interesting. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but I remember always liking those lyrics. But yeah, you're right. The imagery thing is, I'm wired in a way that I prefer painterly lyrics to more sort of concrete and less literary, whatever. Painterly versus literary or something, I suppose.
Right.
I've never been into storytelling per se as a song. I mean, I obviously love certain songwriters that are storytellers. And I love them for that reason, but I've never been, I think my immediate draw has always been to stuff that's a little bit more sort of visually, it paints a picture as opposed to presents it,
Yeah, it allows you to take from it whatever you take from it, even in that moment. You can hear the song a bunch of times and then have it strike you differently.
And it's funny, too, because like if you listen to Zeppelin, I mean, those lyrics are fucking horrible. I mean,
I know,
but I just don't give a shit because the songs are so good, I think there's a bunch of things like that. I mean, there's a bunch of Beatles songs where the lyrics are pretty awful, but it doesn't matter, And one of my favorite songs of all time is God Only Knows by the Beach Boys. Yeah. And those lyrics really aren't that good. I mean, they're pretty...
It's a little sappy.
Yeah, they're pretty pedantic, and they're kind of like, I don't know, whatever. They're just whatever lyrics, but it's one of the most beautiful songs ever written,
Yeah, presented the way they are, they become heavy.
Yeah. I mean, Brian Wilson can sing about pooping and peeing, and it would sound beautiful,
Totally. We've talked a little bit about his voice, but I was trying to find reviews to see if there was anything funny. Usually there's some funny things, either positive or negative or both, on Amazon or somewhere, and there's really not. I mean, mostly there's a bunch of reviews of this record, and everyone's just like, yeah, this is a great record, and pretty much everyone talks about his voice, that he's just is such an incredible singer. When this record came out, apparently they opened shows for Guns N' Roses, I know, but also some shows for Skid Row.
Oh, wow.
Which is hilarious to think, 91, like rock music was still transitioning out of like hair metal, and his voice fit in with that stuff. He could sing the Skid Row songs. I was just trying to imagine Chris Cornell singing, I remember you. Like, like he could do it. I mean, he has a voice where he could do those.
No doubt. That is interesting. I've never thought about that directly, about the hair metal connection, and totally true.
Much more than the other grunge guys. They all had that sort of lower register. I mean, I think there's one of the later songs where I noted that he's singing in the like lower register that he really started to use a lot, I think, on Super Unknown. It seems like in Super Unknown he was starting to like find the shape of starting small and then using that huge screamy sounding thing to dramatic effect. But everyone else, I mean, Eddie Vedder, Lane Staley, Kurt, I mean, Kurt could do his thing, but not in nearly the same range and way. It's just funny to think, like, Hunger Strike was a huge song, the Temple of the Dog song back then, and just the dichotomy of Eddie Vedder versus Chris Cornell, where Eddie's got the I'm going hungry, and then Chris Cornell to do that.
It's funny when you go back to speaking of Temple of the Dog, the Mother Love Bone stuff, that guy, I forget his name, Andrew something.
Andy Wood?
Yeah, he sang high. He was like a hair metal guy. I mean, that band was kind of coming out of hair metal for sure. Yeah. Or hair blues metal, like probably more Cinderella than Britney Fox.
Yeah, I guess everyone in those bands was probably familiar with that stuff. They were just coming from, I mean, not that they were influenced by hair metal much, but they all probably were aware of that happening, but they were coming from Black Sabbath and that.
What's amazing to me is that he's still, like, up until, when did he die? 2017? Up until then, he was still doing that and could do it. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
And the gravel, it takes a lot of, I guess, physical strength to be able to sing that kind of range, but also with that throat character that he did. Yeah. I mean, that stuff just has to tear you apart, but he maintained it for, 30 years? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know how. He's probably talked about it somewhere in reviews or something, but I was talking about that with Peter, about Kurt Cobain, even in his short amount of time, like his going on tour and having to sing like that night after night for a while. I don't know how he pulled that off, but pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on the record? That
revisit it, you'll be surprised. I know I'm gonna catch hell for loving this record as much as I do from some friends of mine, but whatever.
Well, there's a person on Amazon, the one that I did write down, likes it more than you, I think. Maybe the heading was greatest vocals from a human ever. You cannot go wrong with this album. Chris Cornell's voice is the greatest thing I've ever heard. His rock god vocals and the infectious instrumentation is an A+++++. Get it? Don't even think about it twice. Just buy this album. You're welcome.
That's an amazing review. That should have been in Rolling Stone.
Or Pitchfork.
Or Pitchfork. Yeah, Pitchfork for that matter. No, I mean, it's crazy how much I love this record. I really don't. Listening to it now versus 14 years old, a difference of 27 years, and it still holds up every bit as much as it did then to me. It still hits me in similar ways. It put me in this whole wormhole of feeling excited about something, which was really funny, actually, because as well as I know this record, it excited me putting it on for the first time a couple weeks ago. And like I said, I've probably listened to it 30 times since. It's done the same thing to me that it did then, which is, I mean, it's telling. And there's not a single song I skip on it. I think it's all good. And the things that I loved about it then, I still love, but I love the things that I didn't know I loved then, I love now. You know, like songs like Mind Riot or the end of the record, like New Damage and stuff. I don't think I appreciated back then the way I do now, I guess,
That's awesome, because as you were talking about that a little bit before, I was thinking of, I mean, I loved Pearl Jam so much back then, and part of just growth as a musician or listener is being able to sort of separate from those. I could still put on verses or 10 and it'll bring back memories. I can still enjoy it and think about what it made me feel back then, but I have to be able to also recognize my like growth as a listener and musician and stuff, and recognize what doesn't resonate with me as much anymore. And to have records that have been with you that long and you've listened to that much that still do the same thing and kind of grow with you, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And especially, I mean, I listen to a lot of strange music, so it would probably strike a lot of people who know me as weird that I love this record as much as I do, but it would clearly be in a bundle of like my favorite records of all time, alongside like Bitches Brew and Laughing Stock and some other weird records.
I'm so glad that it came up, because I wouldn't have thought to revisit it really. I don't think. I've always liked Soundgarden. I've always had respect for them, but I didn't even know that I had sort of missed this record more than I realized that I did. Yeah. It's been fun to listen to. Every other record that I've done so far for this is just a few, and they were all ones that I knew I listened to a lot more than I did this one, like I've said, but it only took a listen or two. I could sit down and make some notes for each song, and I was ready to talk about it. And this one, it was like, whoa, I'm going to have to keep listening. Yeah. And I still feel like I don't have a full handle on what's happening in the record. I keep going now after.
That's the hallmark of a great record, man. Keeps you coming back for more.
That's right.
And you hear new things, that I love that about records like this, that you can listen to it ad infinitum and still be completely surprised by something at another point,
I know you're always working. Is there anything that you're like particularly excited about that just came out or that you're working on right now? I mentioned the Muzz stuff.
Oh yeah, the Muzz record is amazing, and Josh and I are finishing a record with Mandolin Orange, which is a great sort of bluegrass crossover band. But this record is so beautiful. We made it at a lake house in Virginia, which was pretty wild, and we just finished that. And finishing the new record with This Is the Kit, UK band. Right. And we went over there and recorded that right before coronavirus took over the world, which is pretty bizarre.
London?
Yeah, we were just outside. It was in Bath, UK.
Oh, right, Bath, yeah.
And then after we finished, I flew to Paris and Monique flew to Paris to meet me. And we spent a week in Paris, and it was like super bizarro land before everything shut down.
It feels like so long ago.
It's
crazy.
Heather
and Andrew and Dean were coming back from their tour. That feels like forever ago.
Yeah, man.
Different time. Before time. Well, yeah, I would encourage anyone, if they don't already know you, to look up your stuff, because there is a wealth of wonderful art. And, hey, if they're interested in fine vintage furniture.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of, we sold a pair of chairs to Robert DeLeo, the bass player from Stone Temple Pilots.
Oh, you told me that before. That's right. I totally forgot that.
Yeah, he saw him on our website, and he called, and the first time he called, he was like, my name's Robert DeLeo, blah, blah, blah. I'm interested in these chairs. And then I got off the phone. Yeah. He told me where he lived, so we could figure out shipping. And the next time we talked, I was like, I don't mean to, I'm never this guy, but are you Robert DeLeo of Stone Temple Pilots? And he was like, well, yeah, actually I am. I normally don't say that. But we ended up having this like long running text conversation about fishing, because he's a huge fishing guy. And yeah, he bought these chairs and he bought some other stuff from us. It was pretty wild, pretty cool.
Dude,
Cheers,
so great to talk to you. You are a ray of sunshine. As
Thank
always.
You, man. I appreciate it.
D. James Goodwin, Daniel James Goodwin, Dan, what a guy. That was really fun. I was like, pick me. Let me be in your rock band that spends a bunch of time in a room rocking together. That would be difficult, because we don't live in the same place, but man, that would be fun. He could replace all my recorded drumming. I don't care. Just to be able to hang and jam would be fun. I was a little nervous for that one. He is very knowledgeable, eloquent speaker. It was a long one, but I wasn't going to cut any of that gold. Thank you for listening. If you have a moment, I would love it if you would rate, review, or subscribe to this podcast. That would be very helpful. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, just want to say hi, we're at beforethestreampodcast@gmail.com. and on Twitter and Instagram before the stream. This music that you're hearing now was mixed and mastered by Dan himself. Oh, when I make another record, I want him to be very involved. We'll be back soon with Andrew Carlson, I think. That episode is going to take me a while because we talked for longer than any humans ever should talk about Hootie and the Blowfish. Even the members of Hootie and the Blowfish and their team, their tax people, their accountants. But I'll make it a nice, tight, clean episode. You know those songs. It'll be fun. Talk to you soon. Bye.